In this episode, I host a dialogue between Brad Warner, Zen teacher, YouTuber, and best-selling author of Hardcore Zen, and Shozan Jack Haubner, ex-Zen monk, YouTuber, and prize-winning author of the memoir Zen Confidential, Confessions of a Wayward Monk. Brad and Jack explore their own journeys as writers, the humorous and confessional elements in their work, and the complications of writing about real-life events that involve other people. Brad and Jack reflect on what they see as the politicization of American Zen, describe how religious institutions can compromise their principles when faced with financial and political pressure, and explain their own efforts on YouTube and elsewhere to challenge the hegemony and encourage a return to essential Zen. Brad and Jack also discuss facing criticism as public figures, consider some of their more controversial videos and views, and reveal how they stay centered amidst the polarizing forces of today's internet and social media world. So without further ado, Brad Warner and Shozan Jack Haubner. Brad Warner and Shozan Jack Haubner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello, boys.
How you doing?
Well, I'm so delighted the two of you are here. Thank you so much for coming together for this dialogue. And we were discussing before that there are a few different reasons that I was so keen to have the two of you have a dialogue here. And the first of those reasons is actually to do with your writing. You both are writers who have explored, I think, really a rather confessional and at times radically self-disclosing style. Jack, the subtitle of Zen Confidential is Confessions of a Wayward Monk. And there are a lot of confessions in there. And Brad, your books too. I'm thinking in particular of Zen Wrapped in Karma, Dipped in Chocolate. That one, you let some cats out of the bag.
Yeah.
You know, and these are self-reflective, certainly, and presumably also potentially risky in terms of what you disclose. Risky to what? Perhaps to your reputation as Zen writers and so on. But on the other hand, such powerful and potent aspects of both of your writing. So I'm very curious about that. What is going on there? What inspires that kind of radical self-disclosure? And how do you feel about issues such as reputation and the building one's legend, so to speak, or brand in a public forum?
Who wants to start?
Brad, you can start. I got to pack my barrel with plenty of ammunition before I take a shot at that one.
Well, I can only, the reason I started writing about Zen is because I was trying to be a writer, a novelist at the time, or a screenwriter. I was working for a television and movie production company in Japan, and I was trying to be a screenwriter in Japanese over there, which is insane. But so I'd written novels, and then my teacher encouraged me, both of my two Zen teachers encouraged me to try to write something about Zen. And I'd hit a kind of a wall in the process of trying to get a book published or get a script done. So I just kind of went and wrote this Zen book. I tried to write this Zen book, that my teachers have been encouraging me to write. Sorry. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't write the normal Zen book. I made several passes at writing what I thought was the way you write a book about Zen, which sort of based on books I'd read about Zen in the past, kind of, I don't know, academic approach or something like that. I don't know what you'd call it, just that style. And it just nothing was happening. It just wasn't going anywhere. So I just made this weird decision because I'd read Kurt Vonnegut's advice to writers, which was to write as if you're writing to a specific person. Apparently that's the way he wrote his novels, was to write his novels as if he was writing to this specific person. And the person I chose was my nephew, Ben, who was 14 at the time, and at the time was very curious about this sort of spiritual stuff. He was, his father's Jewish, and he'd gone through the what you call the bar mitzvah process and all that, and he was getting really into this. So I basically wrote this book as the book I would write for Ben about Zen Buddhism. Also not thinking it had a chance in hell of getting published. I don't know, I say this a lot in my videos and things and in interviews all the time, and I wonder if people actually believe me, but I really honestly thought this book didn't have a chance in hell in getting published. So it didn't matter to me really. You're talking about reputation and all this other stuff. I wasn't even thinking about that, because I'm thinking about this book that nobody's ever gonna see is what I'm writing. So that and I went through because I knew the process of how to submit a book to publishers. Once I was finished with this thing, I think I submitted it to 8 or 10, maybe. I don't even know if it was that many, maybe more like 5 publishers of Buddhist books, thinking, okay, I'll just collect the rejection letters and move on. And then Wisdom Publications wanted to publish Hardcore Zen, or they titled it Hardcore Zen. I had titled it Sit Down and Shut Up, which I used as the title for my second book. So Hardcore Zen came out, and yeah, I wasn't really concerned even then, because I didn't think anybody was going to see this book, Hardcore Zen. Because I'd written this book about punk rock and monster movies and Zen, which there was no precedent for. And honestly, I had never, up until Hardcore Zen came out, I had never met even one single person who was into both Buddhism and punk rock, for example. So I thought there's just no audience for this thing. It's just going to die on the vine and it's going to be gone. And the thing that shocked me is I was living in Japan at the time. I went and visited my sister, who lived in, where did she live? I think she lived she lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's right. So I went to like a Barnes and Nobles or one of these big bookstores to see if my book had come out yet, because it was about the time it was supposed to be released. And I saw this book on the shelves called Dharma Punx by Noah Levine. And I'm like, what? I thought like the first thing that ran through my head is, did somebody somehow hear about Hardcore Zen and quickly write a knockoff book? Because I couldn't make any sense of why there would be another book about punk rock and Buddhism. Like, it didn't, I was just like, what? But it turns out Noah Levine had been working on, he wasn't imitating my book, he'd been working on his book for a long time. And I just wasn't aware of it. But so then I found out that there was this audience for it. So I just kept on going. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's the answer I got for now.
It's a good answer. I mean, similar to you, I was when I started publishing my little essays in Buddhist magazines, I had just quit writing before that. Just dropped out of Hollywood, moved to Mount Baldy Zen Center, stopped coming up with bad screenplay ideas and bad novel ideas and horrible short stories that are ripping off David Foster Wallace. And I just decided to focus on Zen. And then it was like 6 months in. So I went to the monastery. I moved to Mount Baldy. I think it was in the summer, or maybe it was spring. And I didn't write a word for 6 months. And that was the longest time I had ever not written anything since I started seriously writing when I was 15 or 16. And then my mom for Christmas sent me this really cool journal, and the pages were so pristine and so white, and it was a smaller journal, and so I wanted to honor this beautiful journal, and so I started just focusing and writing a few notes every night about what had happened to me that day at the monastery, and eventually I wrote down one line, which was about our compost toilets. So we had these horrible compost toilets. It's one of these classic Zen moments where you get a bunch of like spiritually feverish people together having to make practical decisions in a totally enclosed environment. And somehow this led to these compost toilets where that emptied into this enormous box underneath the building. And then as the rube on the grounds, it was my job to like take all these wood chips and shovel them into this compost. So you had to put in this big hazmat suit with this shovel, and you had to take off this door on this huge space age looking box buried in a bunker in the ground. And then I had to shovel these wood chips, this carbon, into this massive pile of human waste. And I'm down there doing this. And it occurs to me, or it occurred to me later on when I was writing in my journal, that this is the guy who had come up with this idea was one of these German practitioners. And the line I thought of and I put in my journal was, never trust a German with a grand vision. And then that became this thing for these compost toilets. And I actually published that under my regular name, which was Steve Krieger, and I published that in Tricycle. And then I got ordained. And this was kind of a tricky moment, because when you got ordained, you become an unsui, which Brad, the kanji for that is floating cloud, flowing water. Is that right? Yeah. So it means when you become an unsui, a monk, a chicken monk, you don't put yourself out there, publish in the big Buddhist magazine, So I was like, all right, what am I going to do? So I came up with just a random pseudonym for this next thing that I wanted to publish. I kind of talked about it with my mentor, and he was always supporting my writing and editing everything. And he's like, look, you do a gesture towards anonymity and towards protecting the identity of the people that might wind up in what you're writing. And so I was kind of living in these two lives. I was publishing these very, very personal essays, and that felt like the only thing that was honest for me to publish. Everything else was dry and boring that I wouldn't want to read, like all this boring stuff. Like somebody finally slips into the role of teacher and then publishes their 3-point manifesto on the First Noble Truth in Tricycle, and it's like their calling card for the seminars that they'll give at Spirit Rock or something. And I was just like dying as a monk, and writing was my lifeline it was like literally like a straw I was sucking through while hiding in the marsh in those old Vietnam War movies when the troops are going by. And it was like writing was my reed that I was sucking air through, because I didn't feel like much of a monk. I felt like I was constantly failing. And so I would sit down and write these essays about my failure, and then it didn't, as a monk, and then it kind of made it more interesting, and I tried to find something in it that was like a teaching, So as far as reputation goes, I mean, the only problem was people sort of started to find out within my community that I was writing these essays and publishing them. And so it was kind of like we had many sort of open secrets in my community, and this was kind of one of them. So I was always on the verge of just pushing it a little bit too far in these very personal essays. So, but I didn't ever really think about reputation, because I like Brad, I thought of myself more as a writer and not as a guru or teacher, really, even, or anything like that. And it seemed like there was a real, it didn't seem to me like when I would pick up the magazines and read them, or go into the Bodhi Tree bookstore and go into the Zen section, it never seemed like there was just somebody talking in a way that I resonated with about the nuts and bolts of the path of a monk. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about protecting people that you're writing about. That was one of the things. You mentioned Zen wrapped in karma, dipped in chocolate, which is I put all my books out as audiobooks and read them myself. And that one I have not put out as an audiobook because I can't face it. Every time I've actually sat down and tried to read it into a microphone, it just I can't do it, because it's all about my mom dying and his marriage breaking up and everything going haywire in my life, and it just it puts me back in that time. But in that book, I think I changed almost every real name. I think there might have been one or two that I actually used the person's real name in there, but Yeah, that's one of the hard parts of writing this way, is that you're going to write about other real people, and then some of those real people are going to come out and go, I don't want you to write about me. So I do try to protect other people, protect, what was the thing on Dragnet? The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Right.
Does anybody even know that reference anymore?
Or
But
more importantly, to protect the guilty. That was always
yeah.
and
Yeah.
they always sniffed themselves out too. Like I would always, oh God, yeah, it got worse and worse. Like I to the point where one monk, I disguised him so well, and nonetheless, when he published his first thing, he threw me in there. I haven't read it, but a friend told me about it. He threw me in there, and I think it was by name, or at least I was very identifiable, and it was straight up a hit job and a revenge mission because I had written about him. But I found that if you write poorly about someone or write about someone's poor behavior, they always sniff it out. Like they know.
Yeah, I had one guy that happened to me too. I think it might have been in Zen Wrapped in Karma that he appears in, that I really did my best to disguise who I was talking about, and then he came out on the internet saying Brad Warner has written about me and blah blah blah, and I'm like, yeah, nobody would have known that until you said it.
I think I know who you're talking about, and I think he loved the idea of being the center of attention, and I could be wrong, but it
Yeah, I
seemed
think,
like he was just waiting to be attacked so that he could rise to the challenge and get some notoriety in the process.
yeah,
I could be
yeah,
wrong.
a lot of that going on. Yeah, but I did try to protect his reputation so nobody could figure out who he was. But now they know because he said.
Yeah, I think the other thing is too, like there was no way I could do the writing that I did and keep on doing it and stay affiliated with any official Zen institution or organization of any kind. Because I mean, one thing I figured out, especially when I moved to our home temple in Los Angeles and had to do my, round as the head monk there, like people like I always felt like in some sense my job was to like be the Tony Robbins of Zen, very subtly like convince people that they should come and sit at our Sunday sit or do a retreat up at Mount Baldy, and then explain to them what the practice was and explain to them how it works. I don't think everybody who becomes a teacher does this, but there is something in that sort of type A Zen teacher personality, I think, that just likes to be the coach,
Yeah.
and not talk about the hard parts about practice or their own failings. I mean, do you find that, Brad? Like you're not really affiliated. I mean, you're
Mm,
Nishijima's one of his successors, but you're not
I'm
affiliated
not.
with the group.
Yeah, it makes me, when you said that, it makes me think that might account for why a lot of the Zen books are the way they are, because everybody's part of some organization that they're trying to uphold and promote and not say anything bad about. And there is that thing you mentioned, the Tony Robbins thing. One of the things that kind of concerns me about the way meditation and things are going in the West these days is that it does get sold by these people who are trying to sell it, and
Yeah,
they're selling it like a product. And when you're selling a product, you want to tell all the good things about the product and not say any of the bad things about the product, because nobody's going to buy it if you say the bad things.
right.
And in the case of meditation, what I've been seeing happening a lot, and there's a bunch of articles these days about it, is people who get into a meditation practice thinking that I'm going to learn to be mindful and calm my nerves, and it's this great sort of like this kind of natural tranquilizer. That's what they want meditation for. They want it to be
Right.
their undrugged tranquilizer. And they get into it, and things start to get weird, because meditation will bring all sorts of stuff. Any form of meditation, but I think Zen is especially prone to this, will bring all kinds of stuff out of your deep psyche. And there have been some cases written about. I remember reading one article where somebody's committed suicide after going to a retreat because this, I think it was a woman, so I'll just say she, but I can't remember. She just had it just was too much for her to handle, all the deep dark stuff in her psyche that came out during this meditation retreat. I mean, and that's a very, sort of spectacular, I don't know if that's the word I'm reaching for, but that's not what usually happens. People don't usually kill themselves, but a lot people will freak out and have all these kind of weird experiences around meditation. And one of the things I wanted to do, even in my first book, thinking nobody was going to read it, was talk about that and kind of say this is what can happen. But if you're in the business of selling meditation as a product, you're not going to say that. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that's out there is selling meditation as a product, and they're not telling their readers about that there's this, potential dark side to it. Not that most people get through that dark side especially if they have a good teacher to help them through it. But I think it's important for people to know that this isn't just natural tranquilizer,
Yeah, right. Or like a performance hack to focus your energies and make you three-dimensional in your achievement of goals. And I mean, there's a lot of that going around, that this is just an ancient version of getting of the flow state.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I led a retreat. It was actually a long time ago, but it was like the last retreat that I led. It was a few years ago, and it was here in Austria. And I mean, the vibe is different here in Austria. So when we talk about Western Zen, there's like American Zen, and then there's European Austrian Zen, which I haven't been in contact with American Zen basically since I left the monastery. I mean, I don't read the Buddhist magazines really, and I mean, I never looked back on some level. I got so disgusted in some sense with all of American Zen as a whole. But the last retreat I led here, I remember I was sitting in I guess in the Soto tradition, you might call it Dokusan. They call it Taifa here. So it's not koan practice. It's basically like the students come in to the teacher who's leading the retreat, and they kind of ask meditation questions or questions about their practice. And every single person that came in, one after another, it's kind of like in a state of shock, like low-level shock, like this is really hard. We're getting up super early. We're sitting all day, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know what's happening. And there was this impulse in me to kind of jump in and fill in the blank for them. Like they're coming to me for something, and I don't want them to give up. So I want to fill in the blank, but that blank is it. That was like the practice. If they can just sit there in that, whatever they're feeling in that moment, wherever that's coming from, I think they can actually have a Zen retreat that can be helpful. But yeah, I feel like a lot of the mindfulness stuff, what little I get of it and what I remember of it, a lot of the sort of the mainstream mindfulness stuff, the seminars at Google or just kind of the mainstream stuff. There's always this attempt to kind of like turn it into something, like you said, Brad, like a tranquilizer or an amphetamine. Like one of the two. Because you can't just let people sit there, but less is more in Zen, less is more. It's just a context to sit there and do nothing.
Yeah, just don't do anything.
Don't do anything. People don't like that. I didn't like it. I was always looking for something without even knowing I was looking for something, It's interesting.
Yeah, expecting something to happen or hoping something will happen.
Right. Because this is what, especially when you're a monk and you're wearing the robes, it's like, okay, this is what I am. Like the robes could be great in one sense because they're like, you're not yourself anymore. So I didn't know how to cook. I didn't even know how to boil rice. Remember, they threw me in the kitchen and just left me there. And I literally did not know how to boil rice. I didn't eat rice when I was living in West Hollywood. I ate like hamburger helper and vegetables from a bag on a good day, and they're like, make a meal for 30 people. I didn't know how to do it, but now I had the robes. And so it was like, well, it doesn't matter if I fail at this, task of making the dinner, because whether I fail or whether I succeed, it's all practice, because I'm wearing the robes. And in that sense, it really allowed me to like transcend what I thought of as me, Yeah, I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, you mentioned the robes. That's a funny thing. I don't like wearing mine because I feel weird. But then I also feel like when I lead these retreats, actually, it's funny. I've been almost exclusively doing retreats and things in Europe these days for the
That's
last.
very interesting. There's a gap over here. Like there's in America, it's oversaturated, but over here there's a real hunger for it, I think. I should be out there like you.
Yeah, I kind of stopped doing anything in the U.S. I don't know. I encountered a lot of weird things. I don't know if this is a place you want to go. When I was traveling the U.S. doing leading retreats and giving talks and things, like most of the time, I don't want to try to overemphasize this. Most of the time, it was fine. I'd come into a Zen center and they'd be very friendly to me and they'd listen and it was nice. But I had a handful of incidents during the time I was traveling around in the U.S. where groups would be openly hostile to me, which was
Really?
yeah, which was bizarre. My
In what
favorite
sense? What were they going after you for?
well, my favorite one was caught on video because I had a friend who was trying to make a documentary about me, and he accompanied me to this particular talk that I gave in New York City for what turned out what's I don't know the New York City that well, but it's like that part of New York City. Maybe it's the Upper West Side where all the rich, froofy people live, and there was
Right,
a Zen
right.
center there, and and I'm doing this lecture for all these rich, froofy, middle-aged people who are the same age as I am now, but I was a little bit younger then. Who are there, and they were just hostile to me. And I didn't understand it at all because they'd invited me
Hmm.
out to this place. So I was like, did you invite me out to this place to just be hostile to me because you didn't like what I was saying? Because they were coming after, I don't know what it was. This whole thing about, you're, what was the one thing that's on the film is, why have you adopted the persona of a petulant adolescent?
Oh,
And I'm
I
like,
remember that. I remember that on
what?
your blog. Yeah, 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 yeah. I remember that they were attacking you for yeah, copying, yeah, like you said, copying an attitude, and as though it was somehow they maybe it was one of those psychologist
Yeah, yeah, it was.
teachers. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
He started asking me about my relationship with my father.
Oh, come
I'm going,
on.
what?
Was he interviewing you at the time? Was it an
He was
interview or was
no,
he
no. I
shouting
was
out?
I was just giving a talk, and then I gave the talk, and then the guy who's the leader of the center, starts asking me about, why are you being an arrested adolescent, and why are you, what is your relationship like with your father? And I'm kind of like going, what is this? What we came here to talk about? I don't know, and one woman taking me to task because she said, this one's stuck in my mind. She said, well, I don't remember how she got into this, but she said, well, I feel like the role of the Zen teacher is to hold the student
Mhm,
wisely. And I
mhm.
remember that, hold the student wisely. I'm going, I don't think well, I'm not here to hold the student wisely. I'm just here to kind of, I've said this before in videos and blogs and things that I feel like the way I look at it is like an apprentice situation.
Right.
You want to learn pottery, so you go hang around. You convince the guy who's the potter whose pottery you like to let you hang around the studio and watch how you work in exchange for, I'll bring your mud to you or whatever. And it's that situation, and it's not the situation where the teacher is sort of obligated to teach you something.
Right.
It's that's I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it can work that way, but for me, it's just not going to work that way because I never, when people come up to me and are like, teach me something, I'm kind of like, I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know what to teach you, you know,
Right. Right.
ask me
Right.
a question.
Right, right, or in Rinzai, it's like you do all these smoke and mirrors in terms of the form. This is the form. This is what you do. We had so much bloody form that we taught people, and it was really just like a gimmick to get them in the Zendo and to shut them up and get them in the Zendo, and then to suffer in their own heat, to just cook on the cushion. Make sure when you walk in the Zendo, bow this, and your hands are 45-degree angle, not straight up or straight this way, and blah blah blah. But in the end, yeah, it was just you got to sit with yourself. It's interesting. You're talking about like that was probably what, like 12 years ago when that incident happened with that psychologist teacher.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like that was like maybe around the time when I feel like the doors to the Zendo were open. Like for, and this could be wrong because I wasn't doing Zen in the 80s or the 70s or the 60s, but I feel like for a long time the doors of the Zendo were open. And then at some point they closed, right? And it became more of a kind of a privileged, upper class, white, liberal thing. And there was certain allowed attitudes and certain not allowed attitudes. And the idea of an apprenticeship, like that's so true. I mean, I was told that you can leave if you want. Like nobody's trying to teach you anything. You've got to pick it up on your own, learn it on your own, practice on your own. This guy is here, the Zen master, and you can go do koan practice with him. But like you're on your own. I mean, that was the attitude over and over and over. Together, we were like on our own together. And then at some point, something shifted in there, I feel like. And then it just got worse and worse and worse, I think, up until recently when it seems like maybe there's I could be wrong, actually. I don't know. I don't know if American Zen is shifting out of that now.
I hope so, but you know, my theory that you've probably heard is that it started out as the hippies were the ones who got into Zen or into meditation and stuff, and they kind of took that attitude that it was somehow an extension of their hippiedom, and so
Right.
a lot of those kind of people are still in charge of things, so they have a difficulty seeing the difference between the sort of um, hippie ideals that they came up with in the 60s and 70s and the Zen practice, because there are parallels, there are things that are alike, this idea of peace and happiness for all or whatever.
That's a
But
good point.
yeah, I don't know if that's what Zen is about, but there's this idea of like trying to strive for something greater, maybe that's it. But yeah, it became really confusing. You say about the doors being closed, there might be something to that, because it sort of solidified around this particular group of people who are loosely affiliated, but they all kind of have the same attitudes. It's not like they're sitting in a room smoking cigars making their plans together, but they all have the same attitudes and ideas about things, and they all agree with each other on this stuff, and so they're gonna put it into their practice, and they don't want anybody to upset that, and they actually, I think, sincerely think that anybody who says something against that is against Buddhism itself. I'm probably being too vague here. I can't think of really any
Well,
specific.
there are these letters that were coming out and kept coming out and always coming out with the same 50 to 75 teachers, and it would be some totally banal statement like
Oh
racism
yeah.
is wrong. It'd be some, 500 word treatise that is saying basically racism is wrong, or sexism is wrong, or sexual misconduct is wrong, or we do not support this, and there was something about it. It was like just go to the bottom of the list to say who's who in Buddhism. But there's also this sense that if there is a nuance in your own personal opinion that deviates from this didactic, preachy text that's being thrust in your face on the Lion's Roar website or Tricycle website, that you need to maybe keep that to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or if you have a slightly different view. I mean, what if you're a wing nut and you want to practice Zen? I mean, we had a few, not many, most everybody that came to Mount Baldy, to my memory, was pretty far left leaning. Um, I guess, I mean, back then it was different back then. I feel like in the last 10 years, a lot has changed. But back then, what you could discernibly describe as liberal, most people were. But there were a few people who weren't, and it didn't really essentially matter. No one felt threatened and like they were in an unsafe space because of this person. I mean, they were in an unsafe space because the practice was impossible and our teacher was crazy and we were all nuts ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely true, and you're right about that. The one I spoke out about online was their I think this was in 2016, maybe right after Trump was elected, and they had this thing called Stand Against Suffering, and that was the title of it, and it was exactly as you describe. At the bottom of it is this list of, I don't know, 20 or 30 or I don't know how many of these famous American Zen teachers who'd all signed this thing. Basically, I'm not even sure they named Trump by name, but it was basically, we all don't like Donald Trump and we think this is bad that he got elected.
Really? I don't remember that one. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it was and it was all, they framed it in the thing of suffering, like Trump was going to cause suffering and we're all against that, and look at us, how good we are. And I'm kind of like, just to put it out there, I didn't like Trump getting elected either, but I thought this is not this to me. When in the 80s, I was very distressed because I was sort of starting to get into, I was still pretty young, I was like a teenager, but I was starting to get into religion and trying to understand what it was and so I was looking at these televangelists on TV, these Christian, TV preachers, and they were all mixing right-wing politics with Christianity. Jesus wants you to vote for Reagan. It's not quite that simple, but that was basically the message. And I thought, oh, this is just the other version of the same thing. Jesus wants you to vote for Hillary, or Buddha wants you to vote for Hillary, and Jesus wants you to vote for Reagan. Seemed to me to be like two versions of the very same thing, and it doesn't have anything to do with what real Christianity is, and it doesn't have anything to do with what real Buddhism is. You're going off on these weird tangents and trying to use your position as a sort of spiritual leader to influence politics. Well, then just go into politics,
Right.
That was really fitting to me.
Yeah. I remember. I remember that whole era. I vaguely remember that specific letter. I remember there was a flurry of them. They kept coming out. It became sort of like it was like every year and a half when there was the latest scandal or threat to the nation, or it'd be a new volley of, or a new letter. Yeah, and I kind of felt like the same thing. Like I don't disagree with a thing that's in this letter per se, whenever they came out, but there was something bullying about it and pretentious about it and just wrong about it. It's really fixated, a fixated point of view. That's what it was. And there's just, like, similar to you, like there's something in me that revolts against that phalanx of prestige justice coming, social justice, if you want to call it, or prestige statements coming from these boutique teachers. Especially because after we had our whole scandal in our community, I had been so naive. So my teacher committed this sexual misconduct, right? It was a complex situation, and it exploded at the end of his life. And that was kind of the first time that I came into real contact with a lot of these boutique Northern California teachers or New York teachers, these people who you're reading in the magazines that are putting out the books, right? And there was no conversation and there was no play. There were like one after another, they came out with these public statements, and they were a little bit brutal, like one after another after a while. And then at one point, I mean, we worked really closely with one female Roshi from the Zen Center of Los Angeles. So she was great. She was open. She would talk to us. She helped our community. But a lot of these people were just lining up and taking shots. I remember I was on a group email with some of these teachers, and this great Roshi from the Zen Center of Los Angeles, and she said she's coming to our community to mediate one of our meetings. And I remember one of the other teachers wrote back and said, "You're going into the den of wolves. Please take care of yourself." And I'm on this email, and he's like, "These are toxic human beings that you are. Let us know if you need us to descend upon the grounds in our black helicopter to ferret you out of the place." So that was when I started to begin to have kind of my feeling of it. It's best not to, I don't know, to run with these people. Like it's a pack. It's like a pack of Zen wolves or something. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but I don't know. I'm not in America anymore, so I don't know. I don't know what it's like. Yeah, I don't know what it's like. I don't know if it's still like that. You got to stick your Black Lives Matter flag in the lawn, and you have to have your, um, you have to do your land acknowledgments before you start your sitting, and your
Yeah.
passion statements for certain oppressed groups after it. Like there was a lot of that when I left America. And again, not like I disagree with any of that, but weaving it into the practice says something. It really says something. Like it says that this is the practice. This is part of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
But that was never my practice. And I never felt like that was real Zen practice. You can be a conservative. Sometimes I'm conservative. Sometimes I'm way more progressive. I've got all these different energies inside me, but the practice was something else. And the practice informed my politics. It informed my notions of social justice. It informed these things, but it was not these things. It was not part of it, But I feel like there's a certain loud group in every Sangha that says to the teacher, if you don't make a statement on this, like, you are racist, or you are sexist, or you are the problem. And then there's a large enough group of people making enough noise, and it begins to threaten the financial foundations of that institution. They're going to cave in and say, this is not the hill I'm going to die on. I am anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-this, anti-that. So I will make this statement. But that says something. It says that this is what we stand for. We're not just a practice center. We're also this sort of social justice institution. Anyways, that's my thoughts. Bradley, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's right. I think there is a lot of pressure on people to kind of make the statement, and and the financial aspects of it really do come into play, because if you are, I briefly, I don't know, maybe it wasn't that briefly, for over 10 years, I sort of tried to run a little Zen center in Los Angeles, not the Zen Center of Los Angeles, which is a totally different thing, but a little Zen center within the city of Los Angeles. And there, even at the level that we were at, where we would get 7 to 10 people per sit, it was very small. Even at that level, there was pressure to keep things, to make sure we weren't going to get swamped. And at some point, we started renting our own space, and I think that's where it all went to hell, as far as I'm concerned. Is I think that's the moment when but before that, we were just taking up space in other people's places,
Right.
And then we rented our own house and made it the Angel City Zen Center and all this stuff. And then there became a lot of pressure not to say the wrong thing, or to make sure, because you got to have people donating, because you can't keep the center around unless people are donating. And then there's a lot of fear around that, of like, what are we going to do, something that's going to make the donations stop.
Right.
At some point, I couldn't abide by the things that the center I had established was doing to try to make sure people didn't keep donating. And so I just walked away from it. I'm just like, okay, you guys, you want to have your center and do that. I just don't want to be any part of it, So bye.
Yeah.
And now I'm out here in Upland, California, in the desert, right at Upland.
Oh yeah, that's right below Mount Baldy. Yeah.
Yeah.
The cacti and the rock gardens.
Yeah, there's not much. It's totally different vibe from Los Angeles, that's for sure. Out here, it's much more.
Yeah, that's totally true. That's totally true. Yeah. It's interesting. Like you said, once you're renting property and you're a 501(c) and you have a board of directors, board of directors is big. Like, it's very interesting spiritual politics, and it's completely inevitable. Once you pass the hat, and you're taking tax deductions from the government, like a lot of things change. Yeah, and there's a lot of compromise that begins to happen, I feel like. And that's not practice. We were always just this ramshackle, practically bankrupt, bizarre, almost cultish gathering of shave pates on the mountaintop, and we were so far outside of the mainstream Zen for good and bad, that things just kind of kept clean. And I appreciated that, And in the end, I mean, I wanted to write about all that. I wanted to write about our dark side in our community and our sexual misconduct and try and process all that in my head. But when I did that, that meant I had to leave the organization. I couldn't stay in it. And by my own standards, even, I knew I just couldn't do that, because when you're part of that group, when you're leading these organizations, you're like this figurehead, and you have to kind of be the company man. You can't question the company when you're at the head of it,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, the whole thing about your teacher and all that stuff, I got into trouble just saying things like, well, I'm not sure, everything we're hearing is exactly what really went on, and we shouldn't just jump to conclusions about, Sasaki Roshi and all this stuff, and maybe we should just, step back and listen. And I got it with both barrels from certain people just for saying that much.
I remember that. Yeah.
Defending sexual misconduct. I'm not defending sexual misconduct. I'm just saying I wasn't there in the room when it happened, and I've talked, as you have, I'm sure, I've talked to some people who were in the room when that happened, and they had a different version.
Yeah. It's such a good point. It's such a good point. I remember, that was the heat. That was like the heat of the moment. And this was sort of pre-Me Too. And there was a lot of that energy in the air. Like, we have had enough of this kind of shit in American Sanghas, which I totally got. But there was no nuance around it. And I mean, so for example, we finally came out with a statement in our community, which there was not necessarily any nuance to. It was like, we take responsibility for our role in this sexual misconduct. And then after that, we had a bunch of women and men, but the women is important apropos to this, who said, look, that your little statement had nothing to do with our experience. You fucking assholes are speaking for us now. You're negating what we went through. You're mansplaining what happened to us.
Yeah.
Because a few loud voices in American Buddhism are who want to jump to the head of the line and attacking Brad and doing it are, making a lot of noise. And there was a lot of truth to that. I mean, it was so interesting. You were attacked, and then there were satirical monologues written against you by certain people. It was like, what is going on here? And I did get the sense that people were using this to sort of, anyways, it was a complete and total mess without any nuance.
I do remember that one. I don't know if that was Shambhala or one of the magazines came out with some.
I think that was in the whole Sweeping Zen thing. There was
that was Sweeping Zen. Yeah.
That was where most of this was happening. There was one website, Sweeping Zen, all of these scandals were poised to break. Like, all these things were happening behind the closed doors in kind of a very creepy, unwholesome way for many years in Zen communities, including ours, and it all exploded at this one time. It was interesting. Anyways, I don't know how we got off on all of that. I mean, there's so much to be said about all this, but it doesn't have anything to do with Zen practice, really. I mean, I always make these videos, these sort of anti-woke screeds, and then I just delete them because they don't have anything to do with anything. They're just, it's just my own BS.
So should we get back on track? I don't know. We've gone so far off the track.
Speaking of, in a way, it's a segue. It's a long, rather fascinating segue. You've both, in your recent YouTube work, explored themes and taken positions that are counter to prevailing winds in American Zen, and you've begun to edge into that. And Brad, you've got some videos here. Woke Buddhism must go. The niceification of Zen. BIPOC Zen. Jack, you've recorded woke Buddhist rituals, social justice in Buddhism, and the Jack Kornfield problem. So you're both taking on these issues. I'm curious why you've taken on these issues. I can imagine some upsides in terms of there's always an upside to taking a counter-cultural position. if not at least visibility or uniqueness. And also perhaps, I imagine, some sort of satisfaction of one's conscience. But I can also imagine some downsides to taking such positions, not least being these are very complex issues, as you've both already said. You know, there are some who, as you say, go along with the prevailing trends. There are some who go against the prevailing trends, and then there are some who just don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
So I'm curious why it is that you have both, recently in particular, been challenging some of these prevailing trends and fashions.
Well, I don't know. I feel like there's a kind of a way that these sort of I was reading about, and this surprised me, and this is years ago now, how the American evangelical movement, Christian evangelical movement, is being taken over by the woke culture, which was just like, really? Because I thought they would be the last ones who would get taken over by that, since they tend to be mostly really politically conservative. But apparently it's kind of creeping in, and there's a phalanx. No, I don't know if that's the word. There's a bunch of people out there who are kind of they want to spread their thing, their teaching, their gospel, and they do it sort of parasitically by coming into some other pre-existing place and turning it into what they want it to be. And some of these people are really clever, and I feel like a lot of these people have infiltrated Buddhism. And I'm kind of glad I can't think of the one woman's name who was doing it, because it'd be better for me to avoid talking about her anyway. But it was, I noticed particularly this one woman was getting published a lot and cited a lot, and she came to be the keynote speaker at some association of Soto Zen Buddhists. And she's this academic and super left wing, and her whole thing was just there was this tiny grain of Buddhism in there, salting a web of social justice ideology and stuff. And again, a lot of the things, not everything, but a lot of the things that the social justice crowd are into, I think, are good things. Trying to make equality and whatever. I don't want to go into it, but it's not Buddhism. I mean, Buddhism is not about that. It's a meditation practice, and it's very specific, and it has a whole history behind it. I mean, one of my arguments about this is okay, you're going to have, I don't know, a BLM, Black Lives Matter lecture at your Buddhist center, which keeps happening. I don't know if it's still happening. For a while, they were inviting these people to come in and give talks about that, which, I do think that the lives of Black people matter. So just, before everybody comes after me for that. But I'm like, well, have you run out of Buddhism to talk about? My analogy is like if I was taking a karate class, and I'm in there to learn the moves and all this stuff about karate, and then the teacher starts lecturing about Black Lives Matter, even if the sole reason for me taking the karate class is because I'm a BLM member and I want to learn to defend myself at the BLM rallies with karate, and that's the only reason I've gone to karate class, I still don't want my karate teacher wasting my karate class with a lecture about Black Lives Matter, because that's not what I came in here for. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. And so I think there's something is getting lost. You're not, the Buddhism isn't even in there in some of these places. I was visiting some of these places, 10 or more years ago, going, oh, here's another lecture, here's another guest speaker about, whatever it is, whatever the thing is that the favorite topic on the left is. And I'm going, well, Yeah, but there's a lot to learn about Buddhism here, and that's what this place is established for. And why are we doing this instead? That's
Right.
one of my
Yeah. There's a lot to learn about Buddhism here. There's like practice to be done, and you do that in an environment that's stripped as much as possible of the sort of the political and cultural and social and personal trappings of
yeah.
everyday life, and then you bring that distance, that perspective, whatever you want to call, you bring whatever you got on the cushion out into the world with you, and you're more effective BLM protester. I mean, one thing that always bothered me about, for example, I did some video about something, maybe one of the ones you were talking about, Steve, and somebody said, well, it's clear to me, they sent me an email, I think, that that like Trump is the anti-compassion candidate, which, I mean, personally, I would probably agree with that personally, but who cares what I think personally? And I know, so he said, clearly that's the case. So if you support Trump, you're supporting suffering. Brad, kind of like what you were talking about with that letter that all the Buddhist teachers wrote, to support Trump is to support suffering. And to me, that's just too fixated of a point of view. It's too polarized and too binary. I mean, I can imagine a world where a Buddhist says to support Trump is to support compassion. It's to support tough love. Like I can sympathize and empathize and see with that point of view. I don't agree with it, but I can see it. I can see it happening. So, but to answer your question, Steve, specifically, the reason I did those few videos you mentioned was in the case of the Jack Kornfield problem video, I was listening to on my headphones while I was like on my hands and knees scrubbing the toilet. I was listening to this interview that Jack Kornfield did with Sam Altman, and it just made me fucking enraged. And I can't even really say why. And I just turned on the camera with my rubber gloves still on practically from cleaning the toilet. And I just shot it, and then I threw it up I threw it up. It was just a response to that particular video where you had a guy who, I think I said in the video, like this, and I was probably unfairly singling Jack Kornfield out, but he was the guy sitting there lobbing these totally softball questions at Sam Altman, the founder or the whatever he is, the CEO of OpenAI, which is behind ChatGPT. He was just kind of lobbing these softball questions at him, and then kind of allowing Sam Altman to duck under the cover of Jack Kornfield as his spiritual teacher. And then Jack Kornfield at the end of it saying, well, if this ChatGPT and artificial intelligence becomes very important, we might need a group of spiritual elders, perhaps putting himself forward. That's what it felt like to me. And then he's offering other people, like, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton or something. It was like the same old, group of people. And the whole thing just struck me as being such kind of an in-group moment that I wanted to sit down. I wanted to respond to that. That was that video. I have to put out a video every week. And so it makes me put out things that if I had a week and a day to think about them, I would never do it. The one about woke Buddhist rituals, I specifically was a response to an email I got from a friend of mine who was like, I went to this meditation group. I was ready to learn how to meditate. And they had these like moments at the beginning of the context to like bookend the sit, to start the sit and to end the sit. And the context was at the beginning of the sit. I forget what he said that they did, but it was like a land acknowledgement ritual or something. And then at the end of it, there was a dedicate the merit ritual. But he said, if I had said, I'm dedicating, and everybody was dedicating the merit to Palestine. And he said, if I had dedicated my merit to Israel, he said, I don't think that would have gone over very well. And so I really started thinking about the context that we use to bookend the silence, just sitting there. And this context is a ritual. And I was kind of trying to explore these woke Buddhist rituals, because there are no conservative Buddhist rituals. There's not like, I mean, maybe there are, but those are specifically like maybe Catholic Zen rituals, or something sort of hybrid. But you don't come across that as much as you come across things like dedicating the merit or I had no better term for it, woke Buddhist rituals. So I was kind of trying to respond to that guy's email. And then I wrote one I did one video that really got a lot of flack. But this was like a pro-woke video, actually, because it was sort of attacking Sam Harris, because I'd been listening to a lot of his talks, and more and more and more, it seemed like he was just allying himself with a specific position, which was pro Israel and pro-war, and the way he was talking about the casualties in Gaza was like, well, it's tough luck for you guys. You shouldn't have supported Hamas or something. So I shot another video where I addressed that issue. And then interestingly enough, to your point, Steve, that's what I'm getting at. The most flack I get on the internet is not from woke people, not what I call the simpering onanistic blue hairs don't attack me. It's always like the angry anti-woke dudes who come after me. So I mean, I got the most thumbs down on that Sam Harris video, and the meanest comments and the worst emails from that one. So it's kind of interesting. Like sometimes I really begin to get the woke position, because I don't really hear from those. I don't think they watch my videos somehow. Maybe the simpering onanistic blue hairs. That's what I call them, the sobs. But there's a lot of people who are kind of like anti woke who watch my videos, and then when I do say something that's kind of woke, they don't like it, and they let me know. But I just kind of, I'm just trying to always look at both sides and not fixate, just keep everything in play, because that's what my practice always was,
Yeah. I had something, but I forgot what it was. I mean, one of my eye-opening moments in practice was I was in Japan in the 1990s practicing with this guy Guru Viking Roshi, and he didn't get political very often. But what he would do is he would give a lecture about Dogen. And then at the end of the lecture, he would do that for half an hour. And then at exactly the half an hour point, he would say, does anyone have any questions? And this is where this stuff would sometimes come out. And if anybody got into the what was then the current thing, which was the war in Iraq, the second Iraq war, I guess, was when that was happening. Nishi were doing in Iraq at the time. And that was just like, what? I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. How can we support that? Because I'd kind of grown up in this, very lefty Buddhist environment, and that I'd kind of come from that. I'm going, wait a minute, that's and then I started to listen to him instead of just walking out on him. And to your point, Shozan, I was just thinking that okay, I do understand how this is also an anti-war point of view, but it's an anti-war point of view that I have not been familiar with. It's the point of view that says that you got to do something when people are just going, bat poop crazy. And somebody's got to step in there and make it stop, and use kind of a certain amount of force to make it stop. And this is the way that you bring about peace. And that often the way that I'd been thinking of bringing about peace was actually, I have to admit, usually totally ineffective. You sit there going, be peaceful. Be kind, and then somebody just starts punching you. It just reminds me of a skit I saw on TV where the two protesters, or the two peace guys holding peace signs in their hands, meet each other in the street, and they start fighting. They start beating each other up because they're, because they have some difference in their approach to the peace thing. So so I started to say, okay, there's this other way, and it doesn't necessarily mean that people who because we have this thing that's been going on really heavily in America these days, where you're just demonizing the other side completely. These guys are just the most evil people in the world, and we can't even reason with them.
Right.
seeing how you can reason with that side, I think, is important. Like trying to understand the way. I mean, of course, there are nut jobs on both sides of the political aisle, you know. And so if you characterize the entirety of this political point of view as nut jobs because there are nut jobs within it, then, you know. And oh, here's the story I was going to tell you. This is, I don't know if it's a good story or not, but somebody challenged me, like, what would you do if, what was it? A racist KKK member showed up at your Zen center. And I actually thought about this, and I thought, I don't think I would know if a racist KKK member showed up at my Zen center, because at the time what we did is we got together, we had a little chat about, you know, whatever, just preliminary stuff and how to sit. And then we sat for 30 minutes. And then after sitting for 30 minutes, we talked about Dogen. And then everybody goes home, you know? And I was actually thinking, trying to take this person's question literally, is I don't know, you know, for all I know, they're all Nazis, you know, because we're just sitting there staring at a wall together. And I think that's actually the beauty of the practice, is that you just come together, and it doesn't matter that much whether you have the wrong attitude or whatever. You're sitting together, and there's something about that sort of helps people find their common ground.
Right. Yeah. The differences just completely dissolve. They dissolve. And then when they arise again, I don't know, when you're in the parking lot or you're in the tea room, you know, there's some part of you that can identify with the person. I mean, isn't the answer like, I have a white supremacist racist living inside of me, you know, I have all these things living. I have Nazis living inside me. I'm
going to quote you on that.
I have a Nazi living inside me. I mean, I do. You know, that's the point. We all have it. We're all members of the human race. We carry all these things inside. I mean, that's the thing that the practice helped me to come to grips with. Not what my teacher used to say, hold God and the devil in the same hand. You got to do that. You got to do that, you know. And then I think you can make, I would argue, this would be my own point of view, that then you can make better choices in your real life. Like you were saying, Brad, you can make the choice to fight if you have to, you know, to bring about peace, or not fight to bring about peace. But I think you can have more conviction in your beliefs and your decisions in the human world if you've been able to really inhabit different points of view. And I think when you practice no self on the cushion, it allows you to not take all these different points of view so seriously, and to realize you have all points of view inside you, and then make the right decisions in life. And yeah, anyways, that's my thought.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about having Nazis inside of you, I think is a really, it kind of even goes back to the point I was making about the way people are presenting Zen or in meditation as a panacea that's going to make you, you know, both, like you said, an amphetamine and a barbiturate at the same time, you know, calm you down and then make you super effective or whatever. Right. And you find out on the cushion that you do have, you know, as you said, Nazis living inside.
Right.
That was one of the revelations in my own practice, because I thought, oh, I'm a good person, and I only think good thoughts, and then I'm sitting on the cushion, and one of the things you do in Zen is you take off the filters, you know, that usually are there in your mind that keep the bad stuff out, you know, and you let it go, and then it starts to go, whoa, look at me, you know, I'm here. Oh my God, that's in there.
I'm a bad person, or a coward. That's one thing I realized. Like when I realized, I could be a Nazi too, was when I realized, you know, it's like I realized this on the cushion or in monastic life. At one point, I saw myself staying quiet in a moment where the personal cost was, I deemed it just subconsciously to be too great to speak out, and someone was going to not have me at their back when they needed it because of this, you know, and I caught myself, because I catch myself as a practitioner thinking things and manifesting things, and I was like, oh, wow, you might have been one of those cowards who just sat around and let this stuff happen because the reputational cost or the personal cost was too great. And it's like, That's how Nazism happens. Not because people love hate. I'm against hate is what these stupid letters, to go back to them, that the Zen teachers always put out, saying, I'm against hate. Well, that's not how Nazism comes about. People are like, I hate. It's like some kind of rage explodes inside someone and they start tearing down the system, or there's a bunch of people who are just too cowardly to speak out. I mean, it's complicated, right? It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated. For me, Zen, it was a place where I could lose my opinions, and it was also a place, and I think this is important. And I think this kind of speaks to the deeper things we're talking about here in American Zen. Like I won't use my teacher as an example because he's a bad example, because he's just a bad example. I'll use my mentor. So I noticed something about my mentor, and it's something I've noticed in a lot of Zen teachers that I like. Like, he oftentimes will push my buttons without ever meaning to. And it's so infuriating. I find myself having conversations with him in my head for days afterwards, because without even meaning to, just something, I said something and something came up inside and he pushed my button, right? And I think there's an aspect, I've always loved this aspect about Zen teachers. Like, you say something and they call you on it. And it's not even usually consciously call you on it or in some rude way. They just kind of have, it's just kind of in their blood to call you out on your BS, right? And I think that's something that's probably getting lost in American Buddhism and in American Zen, where, as Brad, you pointed out in one of your videos, everybody is either a patient or a customer, right?
Yeah.
You don't want somebody pushing your buttons if you're a patient or a customer. But they're, in the Zen, classic Zen texts, teachers are always slapping their students or insulting their students. It's not an affirmative practice, And I don't know if there's a place for that anymore in American Zen. I don't know if people view it as being too abusive. And it is abusive. In a lot of ways, Zen was abusive in my experience. It really was. We were all abusing each other, pushing each other to the absolute limits, But that's how we learned. That's how we grew. I mean, I really hate to say it, but every single solitary training period I was pushed to the absolute limit, and yet here I am, better for it. And I don't know if that's what people want, So maybe American Zen is just the sinking ship.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm afraid of that thing about patients and customers. It does get in the way of anybody actually being challenged on anything, because you don't want to lose your patient or you lose your customer, and
right, and you don't want to hurt people either, right? But
I mean, my teachers were both very gentle sort of people, but they did, especially Shozan Roshi, would be challenging at times. He never hit anybody or he never yelled at anybody,
right.
But wouldn't, he was a force to come up against.
Yeah.
And he wasn't going to affirm everything that I brought to him. And I am afraid that that's what we're getting to. I mean, I because when I started out trying to do it myself, because I was my teacher sort of forced me into this situation where I would have to be a teacher myself. And I did find myself being like maybe too nice to people, and just kind of, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why? I can't. I'm not a confrontational person. People have this idea that maybe I am because they see my videos or something, but I'm just behind the screen. Nobody can get me.
Right, I know, right?
When I'm right in person, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. I think we should all vote for Obama too. Yeah,
Right.
Or whatever it is that they say. But yeah, I don't know where I was going. Well, one of the things is slightly tangential in what you're saying. One of the things that came up for me on the cushion, which was scary, it was just terrifying to me, was I don't even remember, and if I did remember, I wouldn't want to say it, but it was something that I was doing in my life that I kind of subconsciously knew was not good. And I found myself, maybe not acknowledging that it wasn't good, but I found myself running through perfectly airtight justifications for why it was okay to do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the moment when I'm like, the sort of Nazi moment, like going, oh, this is what the Nazis did, when they were, when they were stuffing people into boxcars. They were going through this thing like, well, yes, it's of course because this and this and this and this, and all perfectly justified, And I realized, oh, you can justify anything. That was a big wake up moment to see that I myself could justify. Like if I could justify that, which I wasn't pushing people into boxcars or anything that horrible, I'm sure. But if I could justify that, then by extension, I could get into that position where I can justify any horrible thing and make it sound, like it's a good thing to do.
Right.
And that was like, oh, yeah, I got to be careful about that. And I do see this thing where people's desire to be good is co-opted by forces in the world who see ways to make money and power off of that, and you go, so I'm right at this point, after the last few years, I'm like questioning everything. Like I'm looking at things that I would never have even questioned before, going, yeah, I don't know. That sounds like there might be something behind that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. People getting money and power off it. And also people just using a Zen community to exercise their own demons and to like purge their own past and solve their own personal or cultural or their own personal problems, to use that forum to, I experienced this in my life and I've realized it's wrong. And now everybody has to agree with me and make a statement on the website and put a sign on the lawn. And it's like, well, that's not what we do here. Or, yeah, it's not what's done here. I mean, I think about like I just had this image when you were talking, Brad. I don't know why this came to me, but I was sitting in the Sanzen waiting room getting ready to go do koan practice with my teacher. And this guy was in front of me, and he was a very close friend of mine. And I'm not going to give away personal details because it's not my place to, but I liked him a lot. He's a friend. He was a very smart guy, and he was lazy. And he was kind of one of these types that can do just enough at the Zen Center to stick around and to kind of coast. And he knew it and everybody knew it, and he was stuck in his life, but he was smart enough to be able to just kind of keep coasting. And he was living at our city temple in Los Angeles. And he was ahead of me in Sanzen, and he went in the room, and I heard this screaming from my teacher, this screaming. And I heard something going on in there. And this was more of the kind of thing that I usually heard when there was some drama going on during somebody's koan practice. So he came out and he comes into the Sanzen waiting room. I was sitting, and his face is fully red. He was kind of male pattern baldness at a very young age, and these nebbish, nerdy glasses. And his face was fully red, and he had half a smile, and he like did his bow, and he gave me a look and kind of half smile, and he shook his head and he went through the room. So naturally later on, we snuck behind the building to have a cigarette. I was like, dude, what happened? And he said, Roshi just took his stick and just was beating him and 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 beating, and he said, and this might be a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome, but he was like, it was what I needed. He said it was great. It was what I needed. Roshi was 102 years old at the time. I mean, how much strength did he have? I don't know. I don't know if he hurt him. I don't know if he bruised him or what, but he was hitting him with the stick. I mean, that's not the kind of teaching in any level and in any capacity you can give now. And I remember listening to him saying this, and I was just about to become a Zen priest, which means I was about to become a teacher within this lineage, a teacher up to a certain degree. And I remember thinking, I can't do that, and I can't even do any equivalent to that. I cannot assume a position of spiritual authority so high that I can, in any way, shape, or form, do something that might even be slightly abusive towards a person. I just don't have that kind of chutzpah or mojo, and that was probably the beginning of the end of my career as a temple monk. But it's like, I don't know what else to say about it, except, if that were to happen to him now and he were to tell us about it, somebody would write about it on Facebook and on the internet. And then there'd be 751 comments by noon about how this teacher is a completely abusive cult leader, you know, and that would be it. That would be the final word on the whole matter.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's getting lost, and is the sort of danger of Zen practice. You know, you're putting yourself in a somewhat risky position by going into this practice. It's not supposed to be safe. And one of the problems that I brought up in that sort of patients and customers video is that the impetus in a lot of American Buddhism or meditation in general is to try to make it safe, you know, because they're taking their cues from psychiatry and psychology and going, well, psychiatrists and psychologists have all these rules of, you know, how they can engage with the patients and so on and so forth to create a safe environment. And I'm going, well, yeah, okay, that's fine there, and maybe that's necessary, but I think there is another way for personal or spiritual growth that involves a bit of risk, you know, maybe it should be ameliorated to some degree, but there's a certain amount of risk involved. I mean, the sort of classic picture of the Zen master is there's all that kind of stuff. I remember reading about how what's his name? I think Shunryu Suzuki of all people had, because he's dead now, had some kind of a scar on his forehead or somewhere that came from doing intense bowing or something like that. But, you know, people would come away with sort of injuries. You know, they were like pirates, you know, missing one eye and missing one leg. You know, and I've been through Zen, you know.
I survived Mount Baldy, matey.
Yeah. And then, you know, you're trying to eliminate all that. And I think you're losing something of what makes this practice useful is if you try to eliminate all that.
Yeah.
But we got these groups that want to oversee Zen in America and make sure nothing like that ever happens. You know, you got real groups who put out policy statements about how we cannot do this and that. Like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Maybe it's just the pendulum is swinging one way because there was so much abuse under the name of, like, you know, transcending your ego, right?
Sure.
Like, hey, baby, let me come on to bed with me because, you know, it's just your ego saying no. And of course, we had that. It became a joke at the monastery. It was like when somebody disagreed with you, they would say, oh, that's just your ego, you know? So there's so much of that. And I think that so much of like the safety aspect in Zen is like a long, you know, simmering reaction or revolt against that, you know? And I mean, I don't lead retreats in my robes because like I just said, but there's, like you said, the dangerous, like it has to, like those ideas about myself that I hold so dear. That's what the teacher comes for.
Yeah.
And they just say something.
Yeah. And sometimes the things you hold dear are all those sort of social justice and things. It's often your persona is wrapped up in this thing, and it's not necessarily you going, it's bad to support social justice. You're just saying you got to get out of that persona, you know, where you're holding on to that persona of like, I am the person who loves hate. No, who hates hate.
Right.
Everybody hates hate. Yeah.
Right.
Suffering. I'm like, oh boy. Yeah, I'm against suffering too. You know what the hell is that?
What the hell is that? Yeah.
I'm against hate. Oh, good.
The plot got lost somewhere when that is taking up oxygen in your practice environment. That's my opinion, you know.
Now
it strikes me that you're covering such a lot of ground here. And one of the aspects you've talked about is this idea of the financial, or the inevitability of compromising some sort of essential Zen practice when something becomes an organization with overheads and that sort of thing. And that, I think, patron-priest dynamic runs through the history of religion of all types. And there's barely an era where there isn't some kind of writing or critique from some, either within the organization or perhaps a cave hermit or something, at the established religious order and the perceived compromises that are brought about by that sort of patron-priest relationship. And sometimes the order that's being criticized is, it changes in different periods of history. What it means to be corrupted religiously, should we say, by these sorts of patron-priest dynamics, political dynamics, what that means is different. Sometimes it's more left, sometimes it's more right, if that's even a valid distinction, which not all times it is.
Well, yeah, a lot of I was going to say Dogen supported by a samurai warlord, so he's the guy that founded Soto Zen.
But I suppose I'm saying that there's an interesting. I wonder if, and this might be a conversation for another time. I wonder if a look at those sorts of historical dynamics might illuminate some of what's going on when you make these sorts of videos. Another question I had for you, though, is about, both of you mentioned flack or criticism. You put out a video that's taking positions as you've done, and of course you're going to get some, I would imagine, you're going to get some feedback about that, some emails and some comments and things. Strongly worded letters, as we used to say before the emails. How do you respond to that? One might take such things to heart, and it might quite collapse one to think, gosh, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm bad, I should stop talking, I'm going to hide away. Or maybe it could entrench one, polarize one, as we're seeing. Oh, how could you say that to me? This is a perfect example of X. I'm even more right. And in other words, it could distort you in one direction or the other. Do you scour such emails for valid points? Do you contemplate them in your meditation? Do you take them as feedback? Do you ignore them as trolls? I wonder how it is you respond when you get that kind of an email that's critical of the sort of thing you've said on the internet.
Yeah, for me, it depends on the nature of the thing. There are some who are obviously trolls and trying to get under my skin, and they're just saying it's what's that word, ad hominem. It's just like an attack, and I usually pretty mean to those people. But if somebody makes a valid point, I want to listen to it and I want to discuss it, and sometimes it's I get a little bit disappointed because somebody will come up with a point that I think is valid and worth discussing, and I come back with my own opinion, and then the conversation just ends there because I haven't affirmed what they've said. I've questioned what they've said, and my questioning is often a legitimate question. Like, I want to know the end. The reason I'm questioning this is not to make some kind of a point, but because I want to hear your answer to that question, because maybe there's something there, and then I don't get an answer. So that happens a lot, and I think, where's that go? Where's that going? But I do try to listen to what people are saying. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you're talking about. Like, if I get a personal email, sometimes I'll get a personal email that will be sincere, and I mean, you can tell the difference. Someone will introduce themselves and they'll talk about practice. They'll talk about some struggle around the controversial issue that I talked about in a video, and then they'll give their take, and then they'll ask for my thoughts on it, right? So if I'm approached in very good faith, I will drag my typing fingers through 80 miles of broken glass to respond, but usually what happens is somebody just snarks in the comments section on YouTube. And you can tell it's just an eruption of a mood that just they vomit into the keyboard. Usually when I get some opposition, that's what it is. And then I have to make a decision. And I have to say, like, it's really the case that the negative comments just are seared in my mind. And all the positive ones are just like, oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know, whatever. But you get that negative one, and it really triggers me every time. It's a wonderful experience. It really triggers me. So one of my favorite thing to do is just to heart the comment, no matter how bad it is. And it's such a great practice.
Good
because,
one.
yeah, and it can feel like so difficult in that moment. It can literally feel like I'm taking just a knife and I'm just jabbing it into my own throat to just heart the comment. But it's like a practice to heart and like it. And then it disappears from that little section in YouTube where it says comments, because I'm trying to keep that clear all the time. So I want to respond to everything everybody puts on my page, just respond to it. And if I don't say something, it's going to sit there, that horrible comment. So for example, or I'll just try and say something that agrees with the person. Like I had someone who tell me, I think it was in that Sam Harris video, and someone said, it was a woman, and she said, she had this great insult, and she totally meant, she's like, your stupidity and ignorance. She said something like, it's almost impressive how wrong you are and how stupid you are. And she went on. And all I did was I replied and I said, I know, right? Exclamation point. And then clicked out, and she's out of my comments forever. So that's the best approach to possibly have. Because it's impossible. I have tried to actually, in good faith, respond to people on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and it's impossible. The medium doesn't allow it. It just doesn't ever work. Nothing good ever comes out of it. Nobody convinces anybody. It's like having little puppet stick figures fighting with each other. It's not possible for a human or a Zen outcome, in my opinion, at all.
Yeah, I agree. There's a whole different. I often, if people are getting snarky, I'll say, here's my email address. Write to me directly, and they never do.
That's great. Yeah.
And because there's a difference, because when you're doing it sort of publicly the way you do if you post in a comments section, you're kind of grandstanding, like, here's my thing, and you're up on stage, and there's a whole difference. A different way of interacting with where you and I, if we were talking without the cameras going, might have a different conversation.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, that's a big part of it. I think there's like somehow this. We when we come through, yeah, like the camera going right now. If you and I were talking, this would have been a completely different conversation. If when someone comments on my page, it's like they're mediated through the medium. And I think the medium just changes everything. It filters everything, changes everything. The internet changes everything. It's the shitification of everything, as Cory Doctorow put it. That's these algorithms do to us. It's what the profits behind the incentive motives of the internet. It's what they do to us and what they've done to us. That's my 50 cents.
Yeah. It's really funny because this both of us are old enough that it's happened in our lifetime. There's a before and an after, and then you're looking at it, and there's this whole generation who've never had it before the internet, and they're all in their 30s and whatever now.
Right.
They've never lived without it. Right. So their whole way of communicating with the world is different, and I guess we just have to figure out a way to live with it. But yeah, it's a whole. I mean, everybody knows there's a whole different thing of saying something to somebody face to face and saying something to somebody on the internet. There's a different. People haven't learned to be civil with each other because they haven't had to. I think isn't
right. Right. And somehow the whole medium is just, it's not authentic somehow. That's my take for now. That may change when the internet shifts a little bit and there are some rules or something, but the rules now on the internet are get likes, get attention. That's the rule, and you get attention by exploding, enrage and engage. That's how the algorithms work.
That's how you go viral.
That's how you go viral, baby.
How do you keep yourselves straight in that kind of an environment? Perhaps this would be my last question. How do you keep yourself straight in that kind of environment? You're talking about algorithms, and you're talking about the way in which eliciting negative responses is a superior type of engagement to eliciting positive responses. In other words, if you can upset someone, the way in which they engage with the content usually is going to be more vigorous and more monetizable, therefore. Yeah. So there can be this implication that the algorithms are sort of, so people, and perhaps we've all seen people who've started somewhere, gone down some YouTube rabbit hole, whatever it is. You see them 6 months later, and now they've become quite extreme in some way or another. This radicalization, we hear that word all the time, right? Radicalization that can happen because people are exposed to algorithms and this sort of echo chambers. So given that you're both commenting not simply on Dogen or whatever the case may be, but you're also making cultural comments on, so sometimes current events, but sort of like the state of American Zen, for example, that's certainly within the purview of the videos you make. How do you keep yourselves, how do you keep your equilibrium? How do you keep yourself, I don't know if the word is grounded or straight or whatever the case may be, when you're exposed to those tidal forces of the algorithms?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I do. That nephew that I wrote Hardcore Zen for went on to become very adept at using the internet. He made a bunch of money with this very controversial website that he put out, a news. He always it was often characterized as fake news, but he made a big point of never actually putting lies in his news feeds, but he would skew it to make a sort of a to do exactly what you're talking about, to get the most likes and the most hits and get the most people annoyed by it or whatever it was. And he was really good at that. And he tried to teach me how to do it, and I always resist it. And I'm always fascinated because I will sometimes say something that I expect to get a big reaction, and it's just silence, and then I'll say some other thing which I just put out there kind of off the cuff, because usually I have a loose outline of what I want to say in any of my videos, but I don't script them. So sometimes I'll just say something that I didn't even intend to say, and then those things will go and people will get all upset about that. I'm like, that's just a little aside that I dropped in there that I had no idea anybody would think was worth mentioning. So in a sense, I'm lucky to be so stupid. I think I am, maybe because I see other people who are much better at this. I'm not good at reading a room or figuring out what the zeitgeist is, apparently. I always get it wrong. So in that sense, I guess I'm lucky. Keep myself straight as I do. I don't know. There have been times when I find myself getting too annoyed by the things I'm getting online, so I'll just starve myself of online content for however long I think it'll take to get over whatever it is, just trying to kind of not go there. In 2020, I made this decision to not talk about current events because, there was one current event that everybody was talking about, and I thought, well, if everybody's talking about this, then there is a need, because I found it in myself. I was going on my YouTube channel trying to find people who were talking about anything but that, anything but that thing that everybody was talking about. And I became a big fan of this guy, Rick 9G, who just makes videos about old TV shows. Gilligan's Island or Hogan's Heroes, or just these dumb old TV shows, and he goes these deep dives, and I'm like, this is so nice to just go on here and learn trivia about Gilligan's Island and not have this other thing. And I thought, well, this can be my role in this ecosystem. I'm just going to not talk about the thing everybody's talking about and do deep dives into the most arcane Buddhist stuff I can come up with, so I was actually deliberately trying to find things like, nobody's going to find this controversial because this is a deep dive into Dogen's essay about what was the one? I can't even remember the one I did, but I did like this 6-part series into this really arcane piece of writing that Dogen did that I find fascinating. And so, yeah, that's I don't know. And you know, I, like anybody else, I can get caught up in it. There was one thing I learned in Zen practice, was this way of watching myself. It's hard to explain, but I'll see myself going in this direction where I want to spew out something, and I go, okay, I can feel the equilibrium going off. And if I feel the equilibrium going off, I'll pull back. I don't know if that's always obvious to everybody watching, because some of the things I do, I'll seem like I'm ranting and I'm even raising my voice. I think I even did it earlier in this interview. But I'm not, but I know that I'm not, I'm feeling very even as I do that. But if it starts to feel uneven, then I'm like, better not do that. Because that always goes somewhere I don't want it to go. So yeah. How do you do it, Shozan?
You know, I did a video, like it was like one of these videos where it's like, I gotta do a video. I I have nothing in the queue in terms of ideas. I'm gonna start walking around with my camera, and I got to post it in like a few hours. And it was like, okay, what's it going to be? And I just started listening to the audiobook of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And so I was thinking about that. And I was like, I'm going to just talk about Jordan Peterson. Why not? And so I did a video on that. And the title for the video is, it was just a title I came up with just because I had to post the thing immediately. Some thoughts on Jordan Peterson. That remains to this day one of my least interesting, least vibrant videos, and it has the most hits. And it's entirely because I had Jordan Peterson in the title, you know? So, you know, and then there are sometimes when I've done videos that are about some sort of arcane Zen Buddhist topic that I feel like it has the most boring content. And for some reason it catches on and it gets more hits than my other videos, but mostly I'm like small potatoes, and I'm not going to get any more viewers or subscribers or patrons because I'm getting, because I do more clickbaity videos, or I try and get on the wave. Like I just can't stay on that wave. Maybe it's what Brad is saying. I'm born to be, insignificant. And so in that sense, I can keep on making videos about the stuff that I think there's a niche of people out there who are practicing on their own, and there's like there's a glimmer of seriousness in them. And I think maybe there's a glimmer of seriousness in my videos about Zen practice, and I connect to those people. And I mean, I didn't get a single more patron from a person that watched those Jordan Peterson videos, but I'll do a video that gets like 600 views, and I might get 3 patrons from it, you know? So it's like, those are the people that I'm somehow connecting with, and it's not the videos that get the most views for. So there's almost something in me that thinks people are looking, like Brad is saying, people are looking for something different. I mean, I feel like I put videos out, like they're not teachings. It's like it's someone, he doesn't want to watch the Dalai Lama for 45 minutes because it's just a bit too dry. And he doesn't want to watch like a Joe Rogan or a Brene Brown video because it's just a bit too light. And so maybe I hope I can hit that sweet spot in between these two things. But ultimately, I think I just make it kind of like Zen entertainment. And maybe it gets people thinking and connects with people, but it's not a teaching, and it's not just like clickbaity internet stuff. I would hope that it's maybe somewhere in between, you know. Yeah. As far as keeping straight, I think the audience keeps me straight, because I don't get any more successful by pursuing any more clickbaity material.
That's interesting, because I try to do the same thing. I try to provide that's one of the ways I kept sane about what I do, because I don't think of what I do when I write a book or do a video as teaching, even though my teacher, wants me to be a Zen teacher, or he's dead now, but anyway, I think of it as entertainment. I just think of it as I'm trying to make it good entertainment, thoughtful entertainment, that because that is a thing that exists, and that's a thing I've enjoyed in my own life, so I try to make it, but it's still not the teaching, any sort of teaching happens when I'm face to face with actual people, or when I'm doing dokusan with somebody, then that can happen, but not it happen on Twitter or the internet or YouTube or any of those places. It's an entertainment, and it's fine. And you talk about clickbait. There's one thing that was fascinating to me. This just happened on April Fool's Day this year. I put up a video with the title "Major Announcement." It was a joke, and now I can't even remember what the joke was. The major announcement was a joke. There was no major announcement, and that got way more videos. And I'm like, oh, this is how you get videos. You put these vague titles on your videos that say nothing. Right. And people are looking like, what is the major announcement?
Right.
Oh,
I remember that video, and I can't remember what your major announcement was.
I don't remember either.
Yeah, but I remember that video. I also remember your video on aliens or something.
Oh, yeah.
It was a short 5-minute video, and it was like posted 8 hours ago, and it was like 29,000 views.
Yeah.
I was like, go, Brad, go.
Yeah, that one still I had to shut down the comments section, because the comment section just became, because I get a notification every time I get a comment, and I was just having to go through, I don't know, like 100 notifications a day of these people arguing about my UFO video. So I left the video up there, but I shut off the comments, and it's still getting views.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, so that's how you go on the non-straight and narrow path, I guess, is you do a next video is Zen and video, and Zen and aliens. And then it's Zen, aliens, and the reincarnated alien Zen master. And this is like long marathons where you're in a field somewhere looking for, and you've got 50,000 live viewers. You're like channeling a guru from the skies or something, right? Like
that.
It's not a bad idea.
That's where the big money is.
That's where the big money is. Yeah, it's in the crazy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. This has been very interesting indeed. I wonder if either of you, needn't be the case, have any concluding remarks, final thoughts, as we bring this dialogue towards an end.
I know, yeah. Do you, Shozan? I never can think of anything.
I never can think of anything. It's definitely it's good to talk to you, Brad. We'll have to get together at some point and talk about just fine points about the difference between Rinzai and Soto Zen and koan practice, which we've talked about at times. Although, yeah, we've talked about doing a video like that sometime. It'd be interesting to do just a video on Zen, or an interview situation just on Zen. It'd be interesting. But at this point, I've exhausted myself on all your wonderful questions.
Yeah, it would be interesting to do that, and I think it's important to kind of get into these things. And I think there's something. Yeah, my teacher had such a kind of evangelical attitude about Zen. He was putting himself out there. He used to travel to Israel every year and go give talks, because he thought it was very important to bring the people of the Middle East into the Zen realm. He had this, and I just don't have that missionary spirit, and I feel bad about that. But I do think that this is important, and but I also think you can't sugarcoat it or try to make it something other than it is, because then you lose what's important about it.
Yeah, or sell it.
Yeah, you're just kind of stuck being marginal.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Well, I would be delighted to host that dialogue between the two of you about Zen, about Soto and Rinzai, and comparing the different training methods and views and so on. That would be very fascinating indeed. So perhaps a sequel in the offing.
Okay. We'll come up with some point that Brad and I disagree on, and we can start from there. I feel like we agree too much.
Yeah, I think it should be titled "Why Rinzai is Evil."
Oh, I like that. And actually, I'll take it seriously. Because I have my suspicions that it might be, or my moments where this practice is just.
No, I'm just kidding about that.
Oh.
Why Rinzai is evil and Soto sucks.
Yeah.
Dude, that's a great. I'm in.
Well, Brad Warner and Shozan Jack Haubner, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Steve. Ciao.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.